"Mom, we can't keep bankrolling your medical bills forever. There's always some new crisis with you. You need to figure out how to handle this yourself. That's what Medicare and social services are for." Those words from my daughter Rebecca cut through my heart as I sat in my cramped apartment, surrounded by medical bills I couldn't afford and eviction notices that reminded me daily how expendable I'd become to the children I'd sacrificed my body for. My arthritic hands were shaking as I held the phone, the same hands that had scrubbed hospital floors for 30 years to pay for Rebecca's medical school tuition. The same hands that were now too damaged from decades of hard labor to even open prescription bottles without pain. 30 years of sacrifice, and my reward was being told to find government assistance instead of family support. I'm Dorothy Callahan, but everyone calls me Dot. I'm 71 years old, and I'm here in my sunroom at Callahan Farm in rural Maine, surrounded by the laughter of 12 elderly residents who call this place home. But 4 years ago, I was sitting in a one-bedroom apartment with $200 in my checking account, learning that ungrateful children can break your heart in ways that no amount of physical pain ever could. Tell me in the comments what you're doing right now while you listen to my story. Are you spending time with your own children? Maybe enjoying the comfort of your home? Or just taking a moment to appreciate the people who truly value your sacrifices? Hit that like button because each like is so important to help my voice reach other mothers who might be facing abandonment by the very children they destroyed their bodies to support. And subscribe to Grandma's Legacy because no mother should have to learn the painful lesson that sacrifice doesn't guarantee loyalty. You see, I'm sitting here now surrounded by people who chose to love me, who understand the value of dedication and gratitude because they've lived without it. But back then, I was still believing that being a good mother meant accepting whatever scraps of concern my biological children were willing to offer, even when those scraps came with conditions and resentment. What Rebecca and Kevin didn't know when they were calculating how much their inconvenient mother would cost them was that sometimes justice takes decades to arrive, but when it does, it comes with enough zeros to change everything. I was born in 1951 in Biddeford, Maine, the daughter of a paper mill worker who taught me that honest work was its own reward and that a mother's love meant putting her children's futures ahead of her own comfort. When I was 22, I married Tommy Callahan, a good man who worked construction until a scaffolding accident took his life when Rebecca was 8 and Kevin was 5. Being a widow with 2 young children in 1984 meant choosing between paying rent and paying for childcare, between buying groceries and buying school supplies. I chose survival and sacrifice, taking the night shift as a hospital custodian at Maine Medical Center because it paid better than day work and allowed me to be home when the children got out of school. For 28 years, I mopped floors, cleaned bathrooms, and emptied trash bins throughout the hospital's 7 floors. Every night from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I pushed heavy carts, lifted industrial buckets, and scrubbed on my hands and knees until my joints screamed in protest. But every overtime hour, every double shift, every weekend worked meant more money for Rebecca's pre-med courses and Kevin's college fund. The work destroyed my body gradually. By my 40s, I had chronic back pain from lifting heavy equipment. By my 50s, my knees were giving out from decades of kneeling on hard floors. By my 60s, my hands were so swollen with arthritis that I could barely grip the mop handles. But I kept working because my children's education was more important than my pain. Rebecca graduated from University of Maine with a pre-med degree in 2001, then got accepted to Tufts Medical School. The tuition was staggering, over $40,000 per year, but I took on extra shifts, worked every holiday, and even borrowed against my small retirement fund to make sure she could pursue her dream of becoming a doctor. Kevin followed with a business degree from University of Southern Maine in 2004. While he wasn't as academically driven as Rebecca, he was smart and ambitious, and I supported him through college and helped him get started in the insurance business by lending him money for his first office lease. By 2010, both of my children were established and successful. Rebecca had completed her residency and was a practicing physician specializing in internal medicine, earning more in a month than I made in a year. Kevin owned his own insurance agency and lived in a beautiful colonial in Scarborough with his wife Lisa and 2 children. I was proud of what they'd accomplished, but I was also physically broken. Decades of industrial cleaning had left me with severe arthritis in my hands and knees, chronic back pain, and what my doctor called repetitive strain injuries throughout my upper body. At 59, I could barely lift the equipment that had once been routine, and simple tasks like opening jars or climbing stairs left me exhausted. When I finally had to stop working in 2014 due to my deteriorating health, I expected that my successful children would understand that their opportunities had come at the cost of my physical well-being. I thought they would want to help the mother who had literally worked herself into disability for their benefit. Instead, I discovered that success had taught them to see my sacrifices as ancient history and my current needs as inconvenient obligations they hadn't agreed to shoulder. The first signs appeared when I asked Rebecca for help with my prescription costs in 2016. My arthritis medications were over $600 per month, and Medicare didn't cover everything I needed. "Mom, have you looked into pharmaceutical assistance programs?" she asked in her professional voice. "There are resources for low-income patients that might help with medication costs." Low-income patients. My daughter, the doctor whose education I had funded with my broken body, was suggesting I apply for charity rather than offering to help with medications that cost her less than 1 day's income. Kevin's response to my struggles was equally disappointing. When I mentioned that my apartment rent had increased beyond what I could afford on Social Security, he launched into a lecture about budgeting and living within your means. "Mom, you need to be realistic about what you can afford," he said. "Maybe it's time to look at senior housing options that fit your budget better." Senior housing that fit my budget, the budget that was minimal because I'd spent my earning years putting his future ahead of my retirement savings. By 2018, I was drowning in medical bills, facing eviction, and watching my children treat me like a burden they were obligated to manage rather than a mother they wanted to support. The woman who had sacrificed her health for their success was now being told to find government solutions for problems they could easily solve. But what none of us knew was that the hospital where I'd destroyed my body had been hiding a secret that would change everything, and that justice was about to arrive with interest compounded over decades of suffering. The breaking point came in March 2018 when I fell in my apartment and couldn't get up for 6 hours due to the excruciating pain in my back and knees. When I finally managed to call Rebecca for help, her response revealed the true depth of how she saw our relationship. "Mom, this is exactly why you need to be in an assisted living facility," she said when she arrived to find me on the floor, clearly annoyed by the inconvenience. "You can't keep living alone when your mobility is this compromised." She wasn't concerned about my pain or frightened by my fall. She was frustrated that my deteriorating condition might require her attention and involvement. "Rebecca, I can't afford assisted living on Social Security. You know that. There are Medicaid programs specifically designed for situations like yours. I can get you the paperwork to apply." Medicaid programs. My daughter wanted me to qualify for welfare rather than accept help from the family whose success had been built on my physical destruction. "What about family helping family?" I asked, using the phrase she'd heard me say countless times when she needed support during medical school. "Mom, Paul and I have our own expenses. The house, the kids' private school, my student loan payments. We can't take on additional financial responsibilities right now." Student loan payments. The loans I'd helped minimize by working myself into disability. The conversation with Kevin was even worse. When I explained that I was facing eviction and needed help with rent while I figured out my housing situation, he responded like I was a client requesting insurance coverage he didn't want to approve. "Mom, throwing money at your housing problem isn't going to solve the underlying issue. You need a sustainable, long-term solution that doesn't involve depending on us financially. A sustainable solution that didn't involve family support. The family that existed because I'd made their dreams sustainable through my sacrifice. Kevin, I worked myself into disability paying for your education and your sister's medical school. Doesn't that mean anything?" Of course it means something, but it doesn't mean Lisa and I are responsible for supporting you for the rest of your life. That's not how adult relationships work. Adult relationships. As if the 30 years I'd spent putting his needs ahead of my health were just ancient history with no bearing on current family obligations. Over the next 6 months, I applied for every assistance program my children suggested. I filled out Medicaid paperwork, visited social services offices, and stood in lines with other elderly people whose families had apparently forgotten them. The bureaucratic humiliation was devastating, but what hurt more was realizing that my children were relieved to have government programs handle what they considered their inconvenient mother. Meanwhile, both Rebecca and Kevin continued living comfortable lives while their mother faced homelessness. Rebecca posted Facebook photos of family vacations to Martha's Vineyard. Kevin bought a new boat and joined a country club. Neither seemed to lose any sleep over the fact that the woman who had funded their opportunities was now applying for food stamps. The eviction notice came in September 2018. I had 30 days to find somewhere else to live or face legal action. When I called both children for help, their responses were identical. I needed to explore institutional options that could provide the level of care I apparently needed. Institutional options. They wanted me warehoused in some facility where I would be someone else's problem, and their guilt could be managed through occasional visits and holiday cards. That's when my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, mentioned that she'd seen a legal notice in the Portland Press-Herald about a class action lawsuit against Maine Medical Center. The hospital was being sued by former employees who had developed injuries and illnesses from unsafe working conditions and inadequate safety protocols. You worked there for almost 30 years, she said. Maybe you should call that law firm and see if you qualify. I almost didn't make the call. After decades of being told that my problems were my responsibility to solve, the idea that someone might actually hold the hospital accountable for the injuries they'd caused seemed too good to be true. But with eviction looming and my children treating me like a burden to be managed, I had nothing left to lose. That phone call would change everything, but not in ways any of us could have imagined. The law offices of Mitchell & Associates occupied an entire floor of a downtown Portland building, and walking into their reception area felt like entering a different world from the cramped apartment and government assistance offices that had defined my recent life. Sarah Mitchell, the lead attorney on the Maine Medical Center case, was a woman in her 50s who listened to my story with the focused attention of someone who had heard similar accounts many times before. Mrs. Callahan, your case is particularly compelling because of the duration of your employment and the severity of your documented injuries, she said, reviewing the medical records I'd brought. You worked there from 1984 to 2014, 30 years of exposure to industrial cleaning chemicals, improper lifting protocols, and ergonomic hazards that the hospital knew were causing injuries. She explained that the lawsuit had been building for 8 years, with over 200 former Maine medical employees joining the class action. The hospital had systematically ignored safety regulations, provided inadequate training, and concealed the long-term health risks of the chemicals and equipment their custodial staff used daily. The evidence is overwhelming, Sarah continued. Internal documents show that hospital administration knew their custodial protocols were causing repetitive strain injuries, chemical exposure symptoms, and joint damage, but they chose not to implement safer practices because it would have increased labor costs. The legal process took 2 more years of depositions, medical examinations, and documentation of every injury I'd sustained during my 3 decades of service. The attorneys were thorough and supportive, treating me with more respect and concern than my own children had shown during my health crisis. If you're feeling the anticipation and hope building with me right now, show your support. Hit that like button, comment if you've ever fought for justice against powerful institutions, and subscribe because sometimes the system actually works for people who have been forgotten by everyone else. In December 2020, the judge ruled in favor of the employees. Maine Medical Center was found guilty of systematic negligence, unsafe working conditions, and deliberately concealing health risks from their staff. The total settlement was $28 million to be divided among the affected employees based on years of service and severity of injuries. My portion of the settlement was $4.1 million. I sat in Sarah Mitchell's office, staring at the settlement documents, unable to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The woman who had been facing eviction 2 years earlier, whose own children had told her to find government assistance, had just become a multi-millionaire. Mrs. Callahan, this is well-deserved compensation for decades of harm, Sarah said gently. The hospital profited from your labor while destroying your health. This settlement acknowledges that injustice and provides you with the resources to live with dignity. The first thing I did wasn't call my children. It was find a way to use this unexpected fortune to help other elderly people who had been abandoned by their families, just as I had been. If my own children wouldn't value the sacrifice I'd made for them, I would find people who understood what it meant to be discarded and forgotten. I spent months looking at properties throughout rural Maine until I found the perfect place, a beautiful 1890s farmhouse on 40 acres in Cumberland County, with enough land and outbuildings to create a small residential community for elderly people whose families had given up on them. Callahan Farm opened in the spring of 2021 with 12 residents, people like me who had been productive, loving family members until age or illness made them inconvenient. We created a place where everyone was valued, where no one was seen as a burden, and where the wisdom of lived experience was celebrated rather than dismissed. For a year and a half, I lived in the most peaceful happiness I'd ever known, surrounded by gratitude instead of resentment, respect instead of obligation, and genuine affection instead of duty-bound tolerance. My biological children had no idea any of this had happened. As far as Rebecca and Kevin knew, their inconvenient mother had simply disappeared into the social services system they'd recommended, probably into some government-funded facility where she was no longer their problem. But in September 2022, the Portland Press-Herald published a feature story about innovative approaches to elder care, with Callahan Farm prominently featured as a model for dignified aging. The article included photos of the property, interviews with residents, and a detailed profile of the former hospital worker who had used her settlement to create this haven. That article would change everything, because suddenly, my children discovered that the mother they'd abandoned wasn't a welfare recipient to be managed. She was a millionaire to be courted. And the woman who had once begged for their help was about to teach them the most expensive lesson about gratitude they would ever receive. Rebecca's call came on a Tuesday morning, less than 48 hours after the newspaper article had been published online. The desperation in her voice was barely concealed beneath a layer of false warmth that I recognized from her bedside manner with difficult patience. "Mom, oh my God, we've been so worried about you. When you disappeared after we talked about housing options, we didn't know what happened to you. We hired a private investigator, called hospitals, contacted missing persons." Every word was a lie. If Rebecca had spent even one day looking for me, she would have found me. Callahan Farm wasn't hidden. It was licensed with the state, featured in local newspapers, and listed with every social service agency in Cumberland County. "Hello, Rebecca," I said calmly, watching through my office window as several residents worked in our vegetable garden with the kind of contentment that comes from being valued rather than tolerated. "What can I do for you?" "Mom, we need to talk. Kevin and we need to apologize. We handled your housing crisis badly. We were going through our own stresses, and we didn't respond to your needs the way we should have." Their own stresses. Rebecca's stress had been deciding between a European vacation and renovating her kitchen. Kevin's stress had been choosing between a new boat and country club membership. "Is that so?" I replied. "And what exactly prompted this sudden attack of conscience?" The pause told me everything. "We saw the article in the Portland Press-Herald. Mom, we had no idea you'd won a settlement from the hospital. If we'd known you were financially secure, we never would have suggested government programs. So they only felt guilty about abandoning me because they'd discovered I didn't need abandoning. Their concern was directly proportional to my net worth. Rebecca, I'd like to see you and Kevin, both of you together, this Sunday at 2 p.m. I'll text you the address. Should we bring the grandchildren? They've missed you so much, and they've been asking about their Grandma Dot. The grandchildren who had been taught not to ask about their mysteriously disappeared grandmother. No, Rebecca. Just you and Kevin. We have some family business to discuss first. After I hung up, I called Kevin, whose reaction was equally predictable and transparent. Shock at my disappearance, claims that he'd been devastated when I vanished, and barely concealed excitement about my newfound wealth. Mom, seeing that article, learning what you've built with those elderly residents, I'm so proud of you. It's exactly what I would have expected from someone with your generous heart. My generous heart. The same generous heart he'd lectured about living within my means when I was facing eviction. I spent the days leading up to their visit preparing for the most important conversation of my life. This wasn't going to be a tearful reunion where we pretended the past 4 years hadn't happened. This was going to be a reckoning where my children learned the true cost of treating family like financial liabilities. I had my attorney prepare documentation of my settlement, my charitable work, and most importantly, my current will. I wanted Rebecca and Kevin to understand exactly what they had thrown away when they abandoned their mother, and exactly what they stood to gain or lose based on how this conversation proceeded. But what I didn't tell them was that I had one more surprise waiting: information about Rebecca's recent professional troubles that would make this conversation even more interesting than they anticipated. 3 months earlier, I'd learned through my network of medical contacts that Dr. Rebecca Callahan was facing a serious malpractice investigation. Apparently, her arrogance and dismissive attitude toward difficult patients had finally caught up with her, and she was looking at potential license suspension and massive legal fees. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Maine beautiful. I dressed carefully in a simple but expensive outfit, clothing that signaled my changed circumstances without being flashy enough to distract from the message I needed to deliver. At exactly 2 p.m., a luxury sedan pulled into the circular driveway of Callahan Farm. Through the window, I watched Rebecca and Kevin sit in the car for several minutes, clearly overwhelmed by the scope of the property they were seeing: the restored farmhouse, the manicured grounds, the recreational facilities visible throughout the 40 acres. When they finally approached the front door, I could see the calculation in their eyes. This wasn't their mother's home. This was an estate worth millions, and they were finally understanding what their abandonment had cost them. I opened the door before they could knock, and the expressions on their faces confirmed everything I'd suspected about their motivations. "Hello, children," I said quietly. "Welcome to Callahan Farm." What happened next would determine whether the ungrateful children who had told their mother to find government assistance could ever earn their way back into the life she had built without them. The grand entrance hall of the restored farmhouse had been designed to welcome rather than intimidate. But as Rebecca and Kevin stepped inside, their amazement wasn't about the warm hospitality. It was about calculating the renovation costs of the crown molding, hardwood floors, and period-appropriate fixtures. "Mom," Kevin whispered, his insurance agent's eye automatically appraising property values. "This place is incredible. The restoration work alone must have cost $800,000 for the house renovation," I said matter-of-factly. "Another $400,000 for the outbuildings and accessibility modifications. The land acquisition was $1.8 million. I led them through the house methodically, showing them the common areas where residents gathered for meals and activities, the medical suite staffed by a part-time nurse, the library where former teachers and professors shared their knowledge with younger visitors. "These are my family now," I explained as we passed the sunroom where several residents were playing cards with volunteers from the community. They're people who were abandoned by their biological families, who understand what it means to be treated like burdens instead of blessings. Rebecca was studying everything with the focused attention of someone conducting a medical assessment. "Mom, this is impressive, but the operational costs must be enormous. How are you sustaining this financially?" "The settlement provides more than enough for operations," I replied. "Plus, we've received donations from other families who appreciate what we're doing here." We settled in my private study, where afternoon sunlight streamed through windows that overlooked the farm's gardens. I served coffee from China that cost more than my old monthly rent, while my children tried to process the transformation of the woman they'd dismissed as financially irresponsible. "Mom," Rebecca began carefully, "we know we made mistakes 4 years ago. We were dealing with our own challenges and pressures, and we didn't handle your crisis appropriately." My crisis. The crisis they'd created by refusing to help their mother avoid homelessness. "What kind of challenges and pressures, Rebecca?" She looked uncomfortable. "Well, you know how demanding medical practice can be. The long hours, the liability issues, the constant pressure to maintain standards." I smiled. "Speaking of maintaining standards, how is your malpractice situation progressing?" The color drained from Rebecca's face. What do you mean?" "I mean the investigation by the Maine Medical Board into your patient care practices. The family who's suing you for dismissive treatment that resulted in a delayed diagnosis, the potential license suspension you're facing." Kevin looked confused. "What investigation? Rebecca, you didn't tell me you were having professional problems." "It's a frivolous complaint," Rebecca said quickly. "One difficult family who didn't like being told their symptoms were likely psychosomatic." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. "According to the medical board's preliminary findings, you've had 6 formal complaints filed against you in the past 3 years, all for dismissive treatment, failure to properly examine patients, and what one family called arrogant disregard for patient concerns." The silence in the room was deafening. Rebecca was staring at the documents with the same expression she'd had when I asked for help with prescription costs. "The irony isn't lost on me," I continued. "You've built a career dismissing people's pain and treating patients like inconveniences, just like you treated your mother when she was in pain and needed help." Kevin found his voice first. "Mom, regardless of Rebecca's professional issues, we're here because we love you and we want to rebuild our relationship." "Rebuild it how, Kevin?" They looked at each other, clearly having rehearsed this part of the conversation. "Well, obviously we want to be part of your life again," Rebecca said. "We want to support this amazing work you're doing here. Maybe I could provide medical services for the residents, help with healthcare management. And I could handle the business side," Kevin added. "Insurance policies, liability coverage, financial planning. My expertise could be really valuable for an operation this size." Both of my children were positioning themselves to benefit from the empire I'd built in their absence. They wanted to attach themselves to my success, claim credit for work they'd never done, and gain access to resources they'd never contributed to. But I had one final revelation that would change the entire dynamic of this conversation. I pulled out another document and set it on the coffee table between us. "Before we discuss your involvement in my work, I think you should see this." The document was my current will, prepared by the same attorneys who had won my settlement. As they read through it, their faces went through a progression of emotions: confusion, shock, and finally, the dawning realization of what their abandonment had truly cost them. "Mom," Kevin said slowly, "according to this, your entire estate goes to the Callahan Farm Foundation. Every penny. The people who chose to love me when my own children treated me like a burden will benefit from my success. The children who told me to find government assistance will inherit exactly what they offered me: nothing." Rebecca was studying the will with the desperation of someone looking for a loophole. "But surely you'd want to provide something for your grandchildren. They're innocent in all this." "My grandchildren will receive exactly what their parents taught them I was worth, whatever government programs might provide." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of elderly laughter drifting in from the gardens, where people who understood gratitude were enjoying the security that my sacrifice had finally earned. What I said next would determine whether there was any possibility of redemption for the children who had told their disabled mother to explore her options through social services. "Let me make sure I understand your current situations correctly," I continued, opening another folder that contained information my attorneys had helped me gather. "Rebecca, you're facing potential license suspension, massive legal fees, and possible criminal charges if the medical board determines your negligence constituted patient endangerment. Rebecca's face went ashen. Those charges haven't been filed. It's still under investigation. And Kevin, your insurance agency lost its largest commercial client last month due to claims mishandling. Your house is mortgaged beyond its current value, and you're facing a lawsuit from the Henderson family over the coverage dispute that resulted in their flooded basement being denied. Kevin's confident businessman demeanor crumbled. How do you know about the Henderson case? I know because I've learned that information is power, and I wanted to understand exactly what motivated this sudden desire for family reconciliation. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at residents and volunteers working together in the garden. You're not here because you missed me or felt guilty about abandoning me. You're here because you're both facing financial and professional crises, and you've discovered that the mother you dismissed as worthless is now worth $8 million. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Both of my children were in serious trouble, and they'd come to the mother they'd abandoned looking for salvation they could only find through my checkbook. "Mom, please," Rebecca said, her professional composure finally cracking. "I know we made terrible mistakes. I know we treated you badly when you needed us. But we're family. Doesn't that count for something?" "Family," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you called it when you told me to explore government assistance programs? When you suggested I needed institutional care because helping me was too inconvenient?" I returned to my chair and looked directly at both of them. "Here's what's going to happen. You want forgiveness? You want back into my life? You want access to resources that could solve your current problems? Then you're going to earn it." Their eyes lit up with hope and desperation. "You have 2 years to prove that your desire for reconciliation is genuine and not just financial desperation. During those 2 years, you will both volunteer here at Callahan Farm for at least 15 hours per week, unpaid. You will attend family counseling to address the issues that led to your abandonment of me, and you will publicly acknowledge your behavior and make amends to the community that witnessed my disappearance." 2 years? Kevin protested. "Mom, I have a business to run, obligations to my clients. The same business that's failing because of your poor judgment and corner cutting? The same obligations you prioritized over helping your disabled mother avoid homelessness?" Rebecca tried a different approach. "Mom, what about my medical expertise? I could provide valuable healthcare services for your residents while we work on rebuilding our relationship. The residents deserve better care than what you've been providing your patients. Your bedside manner with people in pain has been the subject of 14 complaints. I won't expose vulnerable elderly people to the same dismissive treatment you gave me." I pulled out the final document that would define the terms of any future relationship. "If after 2 years you've demonstrated genuine change and commitment to treating me with the respect I deserve, I'll consider modifying my will. But during those 2 years, you'll receive no financial assistance from me, no loans, no investments in your failing businesses, no help with legal fees." "That's not fair," Rebecca said desperately. "I could lose my license, face criminal charges. And 4 years ago, I could have become homeless because my own children wouldn't help with rent. Fair is a relative concept." Kevin tried one last appeal. "Mom, we're sorry. We know we messed up. Can't we just start over? Forget the past and move forward?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Start over? Kevin, you told your mother to live within her means when she was facing eviction. Rebecca, you suggested I apply for charity programs rather than accept help from the daughter whose medical school I funded with my destroyed body. There's no starting over from that level of betrayal." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was ending. "You have a choice. Accept my conditions and spend 2 years proving you've changed, or leave now and never contact me again. But understand this. If you choose to stay and try to earn your way back into my life, it will be on my terms, not yours." They looked at each other, and in that moment of silent communication, I saw everything I needed to know about their priorities and their character. The people who had told their mother to find government solutions for problems they could easily solve were about to learn whether their love was real or just another form of self-interest wrapped in family obligations? Rebecca was the first to respond, and her answer revealed everything about who she had become. Mom, 2 years is a long time, and 15 hours a week of volunteering. I'm facing serious legal issues that require my full attention. Maybe we could work out a modified arrangement where I contribute financially instead of with time. Contribute financially. My daughter wanted to buy her way back into my will rather than earn forgiveness through genuine change and commitment. Kevin nodded in agreement. Right, and with my business problems, I really need to focus on rebuilding my client base. But I could make regular donations to the farm, maybe serve on an advisory board where my expertise would be more valuable. They still didn't understand. After everything they'd put me through, after abandoning me when I needed them most, they were still trying to negotiate the terms of reconciliation as if love was a business transaction that could be modified for their convenience. Let me tell you what I've learned about family, I said, walking back to the mantelpiece where photos of my chosen family lined the marble surface. Real family shows up when you need them, not when they need something from you. Real family sees your pain and wants to help, not suggests you find someone else to solve your problems. I picked up a photo of Mrs. Henderson, one of our residents whose own children had put her in a substandard nursing home and never visited. Mrs. Henderson worked as a teacher for 40 years, raised 4 children, and cared for her husband through 10 years of Alzheimer's disease. When she needed help, her children sold her house, took the money, and warehoused her in a facility where she was neglected and mistreated. I set the photo down and looked directly at Rebecca and Kevin. She's been here for 18 months now, and she calls me every morning to thank me for giving her a place where she's valued. Not because she has to, not because she wants something from me, but because she understands gratitude. Mom, we understand gratitude too, Rebecca protested. We're grateful for everything you did for us. You just what? You just think gratitude is something you express in words rather than actions? You just think appreciation means showing up when you need money rather than when I needed support? I walked to my desk and pulled out a letter that had arrived the previous week. This is from the Maine Medical Board. Your hearing has been scheduled for next month, Rebecca. The preliminary findings suggest that your license suspension is likely and criminal charges are being considered for the Patterson case. Rebecca's composure finally shattered completely. Please, Mom, I need help. The legal fees alone will bankrupt me. I could lose everything. And 4 years ago, I was going to lose everything too. Do you remember what advice you gave me? Silence. You told me to explore my options through Medicare and social services. You told me I needed to find sustainable solutions that didn't depend on family financial support. I opened the letter and read aloud. Dr. Callahan's pattern of dismissive patient care, failure to conduct thorough examinations, and arrogant disregard for patient concerns represents a serious threat to public safety. I looked up at my daughter. Does that sound familiar? It's exactly how you treated me when I was in pain and needed help. Kevin was calculating frantically. Mom, what if we agreed to your conditions? 2 years of volunteering, family counseling, public acknowledgement of our mistakes. After that, you'd restore us to your will? I said I'd consider it. There are no guarantees, Kevin. Just like there were no guarantees that I'd survive homelessness when you told me to find government housing. They stayed for another hour, alternating between desperate pleas and attempts to negotiate different terms. But everything they said only confirmed what I'd suspected all along. They saw me as a resource to be managed, not a person to be loved. When they finally left, driving away in Kevin's mortgaged luxury sedan, I felt the same sense of peace that had settled over me the day I'd moved into Callahan Farm. The uncertainty was over. My biological children had revealed themselves completely, and I was finally free to focus on the family that had chosen me. 6 months later, Rebecca's medical license was suspended for 2 years, and she was sentenced to community service for patient endangerment. Kevin's insurance agency went bankrupt, and he was forced to sell his house to pay legal fees from the multiple lawsuits against him. Neither contacted me during their legal troubles. Not to apologize, not to acknowledge that their arrogance and dismissive attitudes had finally caught up with them, not to admit that the same character flaws that had led them to abandon their mother had destroyed their professional lives as well. Meanwhile, life at Callahan Farm flourished. We expanded to include 15 residents, added a small medical clinic staffed by a nurse practitioner who understood that elderly patients deserved compassion rather than condescension, and established a scholarship fund for healthcare workers who wanted to specialize in geriatric care. The most rewarding development was watching our residents rediscover their sense of purpose and value. Mr. Peterson, a retired engineer whose family had put him in a substandard facility, now teaches woodworking classes for local high school students. Mrs. Chen, abandoned by children who found her too demanding, runs our successful vegetable garden that supplies produce to 3 local food banks. Every success story validated my decision to invest in people who understood gratitude rather than biological children who took everything for granted. These elderly residents call me on holidays not because they want something, but because they're genuinely thankful for a place where they're valued rather than warehoused. The most profound moment came last Christmas when all 15 residents gathered around our dining room table. As we shared what we were grateful for, each person spoke about second chances, about finding family when they'd given up hope, about learning that love isn't about blood relations, but about who chooses to stay when life gets difficult. That's when I realized my settlement hadn't just given me financial security, it had given me the resources to discover what real family looks like. The hospital's negligence had destroyed my body, but the compensation allowed me to build something beautiful from that destruction. My biological children occasionally send birthday cards and Christmas gifts, still making performative gestures of affection while avoiding any real accountability for their abandonment. They tell people that we're working through some family issues, as if my refusal to fund their failures is just a temporary misunderstanding. Last month, my granddaughter Ashley, Kevin's daughter, turned 18 and reached out to me directly. She'd heard whispers about our family situation and wanted to understand why she barely knew her grandmother. "Grandma Dot," she said when we met for coffee, "I need to know what really happened between you and Dad. Mom says you're being unreasonable, but some of the things she's told me don't make sense." I told her the truth about sacrifice, abandonment, and the difference between loving someone and using someone. Ashley listened with the maturity of someone who had watched her parents' marriage crumble under the weight of financial stress and poor character. "I'm sorry they treated you that way," she said finally. "That's not the kind of people I want to be." Ashley has started volunteering at Callahan Farm on weekends, and she's applied to study geriatric nursing with financial support from our scholarship program. Unlike her father, she understands that love must be demonstrated through actions, not just claimed through biology. If this story of justice, resilience, and the true meaning of family touched your heart, like this video right now, tell me in the comments about a time when you discovered that chosen family can be stronger than biological family, and subscribe to Grandma's legacy, because every mother deserves children who value her sacrifices. I'm sitting here in my study at Callahan Farm, surrounded by thank you letters from residents and their grateful grandchildren, looking out at gardens tended by people who understand the value of second chances. At 71 years old, I've learned that the greatest inheritance you can leave isn't money. It's the knowledge that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The hospital settlement gave me more than financial compensation. It gave me justice for decades of physical destruction, and it gave me the means to create a legacy based on compassion rather than obligation, gratitude rather than guilt. Remember, you can't force people to appreciate your sacrifices, but you can choose to invest in people who understand their value. Sometimes the family that raises you isn't the family that sustains you, and sometimes the greatest success is building something beautiful from the ashes of disappointment. The people I chose me back. That's the difference between real family and biological accident. Genuine relationships are mutual, voluntary, and built on respect rather than entitlement.